The intention of Natural Freedom League is to expand the understanding of natural law, which is based on objective morality, and to expose the illegitimacy of the belief in authority, and thus the inherent immorality of all government.
We be the Natural Freedom League, cause we become no longer unvegan. We seek in the wisdom, and that's why we did come to this prison of prism. And that's why the beat thumps, and that's why we speak up. We be the Natural Freedom League, cause we become no longer unvegan. We seek in the wisdom, and that's why we did come to this prison of prism. And that's why the beat thumps, and that's why we speak up. We be the
Hello, everybody. Once again, it is John Wydogen here with Natural Freedom League. We are at naturalfreedomleague.com. Back at it once again with my producer and co-host, Chill Will Keller. What's up, Will?
What's up, brother?
It's going good.
Yeah, man. Back at it.
Yeah, we took a little hiatus, kind of an unexpected one. It just kind of naturally happened. Will had some presentations, the Seed 4 conference, which was a hit, put together by Brandon Martin and Nate Cap. Their website is occulted something or other.
Occulted Knowledge. And
Occulted Knowledge.
Their main website is thecubbyhole.com.
Right. Another really good podcast. And so Will had that presentation, and we kind of just were working on other things, thinking about other projects, and took a little break, and definitely planning on getting back at this. And what's interesting about today's episode is it's kind of a discussion that me and Will have been having during our hiatus on our phone conversations, and it's based on the work of mainly two teachers, Mark Passio, of course, and then the other one is Marcus the Servant King. His website is servantking.com or theservantking.com. We'll put the link in the description below. We will also put a link to the playlist of his two presentations. One was called the Confusion Presentations, and one was called Unraveling. And those have been taken off of YouTube by him, and he's doing some type of paid seminar or courses online, but he took those presentations down, and not really sure exactly what he's up to now, but these two presentations are very valuable. You may not agree with everything they say, but I do think that there is something to learn from what he teaches. And so we're going to kind of get into comparing and contrasting these two perspectives, which kind of come from a different angle, but we kind of feel like they're saying very similar ideas. So Will, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, we did snag those videos before he took them down. So yeah, like John said, we'll post a link, and we're gonna upload those as well. But yeah, man, it's all about gathering the puzzles of, the pieces of the puzzle, and then putting them together. This is the first stage of the trivium. So it's not just about one teacher, one content creator. You need multiple to deepen that understanding of what's going on. So these are two gentlemen that we think highly of, and they both overlap really, really well and good in some areas, and yet different at times. So
yeah. And one thing for me, and I think Will is the same way, is with as much as we learn about all these different perspectives and ideas, we always have that open mind to where when a new concept shows up, and it, you know, maybe conflicts with what we've learned and what we understand, or we see a space where, okay, maybe this needs to be worded differently, or maybe we're missing a piece, that there's always that evolution of consciousness. And I think that that's a big part of our podcast, is just sort of having these conversations and watching that understanding evolve. And you don't really know where it's going to take us. And I have a feeling with this episode, it may end up kind of open-ended. I don't really know. I've gone back and forth about how I feel about this topic. And, you know, I think that it's important, but I also think that everyone has their different way of expressing these ideas. And so it might just be one person chooses to use one term and one person chooses to use another. But they may be saying the same things, or they may be slightly different. So
It's all
the
about
basic,
being the seeker, right?
exactly.
That's kind of my motto, man. That archetype of the seeker, which is, you know, it's an aspect, characteristic of the mind that generates the desire to seek truth. And so, you know, it's a lifelong process. You know, I would say it's even longer than that. That's what we're here to do, is to learn and evolve in consciousness. So, you know, you don't go halfway up the mountain and pitch your tent. You got to keep diving into information and going deeper. And yeah, this is gonna be fun.
Exactly. So we're going to go right into it. So the main concept, which you will know by the title, is anarchy or thearchy. So we promote the concept of true anarchy in our work. And this is mostly based on the rhetoric of Mark Passio, who basically explains it this way. Anarchy means no rulers, not no rules. So if there are no rulers, then where do the rules come from? The rules come from natural law, or you could call it God's law. It has a lot of different names: cosmic law, universal law, spiritual law, karmic law. Mark, in his work, explains how the word natural actually means God. So right there, I think, is a distinction that needs to be made, because I think when you hear the word natural, you tend to think material, the material realm, right? And you don't necessarily, I mean, I do, some people do, but some people probably don't, that if they look at nature, they might look at it from just a materialist perspective. But if you go through all of Mark's work, which we highly recommend, especially the podcast, and I'm going to say this about the podcast: it's daunting to get through it all, but I would say get through the first 10 to 20 episodes at least, where he works through his basic concepts, and then he works through the different types of mind control that are used. I think he gets through that within the first 20 episodes. That'll give you a real good foundation of his perspective, and you can move on from there. But definitely, you know, put in that effort of at least getting through the first 10 to 20 episodes of what on earth is happening. But he does eventually explain how the word natural comes from, I believe it's Egyptian, I believe, netter.
Nature and
Yeah,
NTR, yeah. It's commission.
right. And it actually means God. So again, these terms, they change, they have different connotation as time goes on, and so we need to really focus on getting to the root word and what it is we mean when we use these words. So we wanted to get into what is the definition of law with a capital L versus law lowercase l. So when I looked in the dictionary, I went to dictionary.com, And what is interesting is that the definition that we are looking for isn't in this definition. So there's a lot of definitions in here too. I think there's about 10. So I'm just going to read through them real quick. Law. The principles and regulations established in a community by some authority and applicable to its people, whether in the form of legislation or of custom, and policies recognized and enforced by judicial decision. That's man's law. Any written or positive rule or collection of rules prescribed under the authority of the state or nation, as by the people in its constitution. The controlling influence of such rules, the condition of society brought about by their observance, maintaining law and order. A system or collection of such rules. The department of knowledge concerned with these rules, jurisprudence, to study law. The body of such rules concerned with a particular subject or derived from a particular source, commercial law. An act of the supreme legislative body of a state or nation, as distinguished from the Constitution. The principles applied in the courts of common law, as distinguished from equity. The profession that deals with law and legal procedure, to practice law, legal action, litigation, to go to law. A person, group, or agency acting officially to enforce the law arrived at the scene soon after the alarm went off. Any rule or injunction that must be obeyed. Having a nourishing breakfast was an absolute law in our household. A rule or principle of proper conduct sanctioned by conscience, concepts of natural justice, or the will of a deity, a moral law. So that's the closest, I would say, to what we're looking for in terms of law, but still not worded exactly the way that I think it should be. A rule or manner of behavior that is instinctive or spontaneous, the law of self-preservation. That's a satanic law. In philosophy, science, etc. One, a statement of a relation or sequence of phenomena invariable under the same conditions. A mathematical rule, again, closer to what we're talking about. A principle based on the predictable consequences of an act, condition, etc. The law of supply and demand. A rule, principle, or convention regarded as governing the structure or the relationship of an element in the structure of something, as of a language or work of art, the laws of playwriting, the laws of grammar. A commandment or a revelation from God. Sometimes law, a divinely appointed order or system. The law, and they use as an example the law of Moses. The preceptive part of the Bible, especially of the New Testament, in contradistinction to its promises, the law of Christ. British sports, an allowance of time or distance given a quarry or competitor in a race, as the head start given a fox before the hounds are set after it. Okay, so this definition doesn't include what we were looking for. So I got this dictionary recently. It's a little bit older. It's from the 90s. It's college. And it has a sequence of events in nature or in human activities that has been observed to occur with unvarying uniformity under the same conditions. So, and then it says B, the formulation in words of such a sequence, the law of gravitation, the law of diminishing returns. So a law is actually, the actual definition of a law is something that's unchangeable, right? A law of nature is something that is unchangeable. And we would distinguish that by putting a capital L and calling it capital L law. Everything else is an imitation of that. And the difference between nature's laws and man's laws is that nature's law does not change, and that man's law is constantly changing.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that, Will?
Yeah, well said. And one thing to keep in mind too, I talk to people and definitions are extremely important, right? Definitions, clarity of meaning. And someone can pick up a dictionary and then, oh, look, there it is. For instance, we'll get into anarchy, right? Bam, it says chaos or lawlessness. And but keep in mind that dictionaries are written by men. When you dive deep into the esoteric and even go to the etymology, messing that word up, or the root, right? You get into the Latin or the Greek or um, the Arabic, then you really break down what it means on a deeper level. So it's good to take in all of those sources. Law with a capital L, and this is something in occultism and the esoterics, to capitalize the first letter, having it mean something completely different. um, Capital L, law, is binding and immutable, and we can see this in nature, right? You can see the forces, thermodynamics, magnetism, gravity, all of this stuff. These are laws. They don't change under any circumstances. They're binding to us all. So yeah, different from human beings just writing something on paper and calling it binding and immutable and unchanging when it does. See, so
Right. And we would say that natural law is falls in that category of a law of nature, and that it is the same for all of us, that what we do matters, and you get what you give. As the Beatles said, the love you take is equal to the love you make, right?
yeah, no doubt. And this is a science. You can use the scientific method. You can observe the effects, and you got to keep in mind that at the foundation of everything, it's energy and then consciousness, right? So even the what we would call physics, the physical laws, um, they are superseded by the metaphysical, the energetic laws. So they're one and the same, but on an energetic level. So metaphysics gets kind of a bad rap. The materialistic atomist scientists nowadays, even the modern philosophers, kind of downplay the metaphysical aspect of reality, when that's not the case. That is a huge part of it. And that's where the esoteric philosophy, true philosophy, takes you down those roads.
Yeah.
And that's what natural law is the physical laws and the metaphysical laws. We mainly refer to the metaphysical because all is energy. So it starts with the principles, the metaphysical principles.
Right.
Yep.
So after having gone through Mark's whole podcast and getting through all his material, I moved on to other occult teachers. So, that's one cool thing about Mark Passio's work is, at least for me, he opened me up to this whole world of occult teaching and made it less taboo. I mean, I never really didn't look at it because I thought it was bad or evil or anything like that. But once I understood that occult just means hidden, and that occult knowledge is neither good nor bad, it just depends on who's wielding it, who has the knowledge, then it's really amazing just how many teachers there are that you can look into. One that I specifically got into was Rudolf Steiner, and I do see a lot of similarities between Rudolf Steiner and Mark Passio, because Steiner was talking about spiritual science in the same way that Mark talks about natural law as a science. I will say the difference between Mark and Rudolf Steiner is Rudolf Steiner got into much more spiritual ideas. He studied theosophy, he started anthroposophy. He would talk about Atlantis and Lemuria, and humans past existences on other planets and things like that. where Mark Passio's work is much more boots on the ground, a bit more materialist, I would say. And again, a bit more dealing with what's going on here and solutions to that. However, if you listen to Mark Passio, in earnest, you realize he is very spiritual as well. He has a whole presentation on this idea. He calls it streetwise spirituality. And so I think that that's just a personal story for me, from where my mind went, and where I started researching after I got through Mark's work. At that time, Mike Mattingly, the Funky Father, was dealing with some legal issues, and he's gone down the path of dealing with man's law and confronting man's law and finding remedies to man's law. And he introduced me to a couple that's on YouTube called The Human Frequency. And the reason why he introduced me to them was because of a concept that they get into, which is the assumed name certificate, where you basically register your legal name as a business entity, and you separate yourself from that entity. And by doing so, you are taking a step back to your original status as a man or woman born onto this, a living man or woman born onto the planet, not a fictitious entity registered with the state. So when I went to their page and learned some of their information, they recommended the Servant King, also known as Marcus. Marcus is a older gentleman. He put these videos out in 2013, 2014. The thing that struck me about his information was how similar it was to Mark Passio, except that he was coming from more of a legal, biblical perspective. So his story briefly is he owned a bird aviary, I guess you'd call it. He owned all these exotic birds. He lived in Canada, and they changed the law about what he could own and not own. And he started having to deal with all these different government agents. And someone told him, well, Marcus, you actually don't own anything. Nobody owns anything. And this led him down a path of trying to understand why no one owns anything. There is no such thing as owning property. He is another one who gets into a lot of these definitions. And it's interesting because in some cases, I think his definitions are slightly off, but yet you can see where what he's saying still makes sense. So we'll get into that in a few minutes. But one thing really powerful about him, or in his presentation, is, at least to me, is the description of our part that we play in the creation of the state and the state of slavery that we're in. And he describes how we turn away from God, and he would say that that's that is a violation of the first commandment, right? We turn from God, and then we get together as people, as individuals who have turned away from God, and we try to manage things here on earth. And so what we do is we get together, we put our heads together, and we create a new God, and that is the state. And then the state recreates us as a fictitious entity of the state. And at that point, God doesn't recognize us anymore. He gets into, he talks about occultism as well, but he talks about it from more of a negative perspective. So he gets into this idea of how everything that we are doing is fictitious, you know, from our fictitious name, the whole idea of commerce, and really the idea of the state is a fiction. It's their legal fictions, and we participate in them. So since these are dead entities, your fictitious business name is not a living being, it's a dead entity. That when we assume that name, we are giving life to the dead. So he would say that we are practicing occultism. Now, compare that to Mark. Well, what we would say is, no, it's not just occultism that you're practicing dark occultism. You're participating in the dark occultist system, and you're giving life to it. Some interesting things that he says, he talks about how they summons you to appear, and then he says it a little different. Summons to appear. Summons to appear. You know, it is like a ritual of some sort that they're doing. All rise. You know, you're giving life to these dead entities. You're participating in this fiction, and so yeah.
Even the dark occultists, right? What did they call the majority of people? The unbegun. They call them the dead.
The dead.
Because they're spiritually dead. So they, yeah, I mean, that was a good introduction. And I'll say this on occultism. For people that aren't familiar with occultism, what is occultism? It's simply hidden knowledge. Well, what knowledge? It's the knowledge of how the human psyche operates and functions, and how this reality, the natural world, operates and functions, and the correspondences between them. So it's the most powerful and important knowledge that we can have in existence, the knowledge of self and the knowledge of nature, reality. So this is, since it is the most important information, it is hidden by, you know, the powers that should not be, the predator class. They hide this information because if you have the knowledge of self and nature, you can claim your power. You can take your power back, and you know, and obviously that's our aim, is to educate people on this type of information.
Right. So another concept that he talks about, which I think is we have to kind of again make distinctions and decipher, is he talks about the supernatural. So he says that when we do that we are participating in a supernatural like activity, like we are personifying, you know, these dead entities. That's one of the forms of witchcraft, giving life to the dead, and that he calls that supernatural. Now, to me, I think supernatural is kind of an interesting word and something that people should think about, because even if we think of the spiritual realm, I would say that that's still nature. That's still natural. You know, anything, the only thing supernatural really in the universe is God, you know, and, you know, things that we create, I would call artificial, right? And I would say that if there are other beings, which I assume there are, that are either us in a previous form, in a different form, a spiritual form, or even some other types of beings like that may exist somewhere in the universe, that anything they create is also artificial. So you've got the creator, and then everything is under the creator. And anything that falls into that, if there's the Anunnaki or some type of alien being, anything that they create would also technically fall into artificial. And the idea that, you know, us, you know, dealing with a spirit is supernatural, I would tend to argue that that's not the case, that these spirits are a part of nature too. They're just a part of nature that we don't see. And so I don't know. What do you think about
Yeah.
that, Will?
Yeah, supernatural. I think that's a term that again, the materialistic scientists came up with because it's out of their realm of comprehension,
Right.
right? Whenever somebody doesn't know something, they have to put a label on it, like supernatural. Everything has its cause, so it's just that it's not understood fully,
Yeah,
right? Same thing with
exactly.
chance. Chance is the same way. There's no such thing as chance. It's just law not recognized, meaning you haven't recognized the cause of it. So
Exactly. And so this isn't really the focus of what we're talking on, but just to compare and contrast, the Servant King's ideas on property slightly differ from Mark's, but again, it's more in the wording. And I think technically they're saying the same thing. What Marcus is saying is that you don't own anything. The creator owns everything. Everything is part of the creation. And Marcus clarifies that dominion means that you have the right to use it, you know. And the difference between possessing something and thinking that you own it is there's a slight distinction there that I think we should be aware of when we use these terms. I don't know that I think the only thing we own, and you could even argue that is our bodies. That's the one thing we come here with and that we'll leave with. But I think that Mark Passio bases a lot of his work on property rights. But again, I think he does make the distinction that means that you're using it, it's in your possession, that's how he describes ownership or property. And that people don't have the right to come and just like take it from you or anything like that.
yeah, especially like the fruits of your labor or something that you created. It's somewhat an extension of you. That's where Mark gets into property. Working hard, and then the government wants to come in and take taxes, the stealing the fruits of your labor, which essentially, if you break it down, it's energy. It's the whole vampire archetype. Sucking your blood, taking your energy. So
Right. So also, I've been really pondering this too, is the idea of free will. I've been, kind of coming to the thought that perhaps free will is actually an illusion, because the way I use it, the analogy is, imagine that there's a video game, and in the video game, there's a trillion different things you can do in this game. You can wander around, you can beat people up, you can steal things, you can do whatever you want. But to win the game, you have to align yourself with the code of the game, and you could say that that's natural law. And so ultimately you have the free will to ignore the one true will, but to get to where we really need to go and to get the most out of this world and this life, ultimately you have to align your will with the will of the creator, or the one true will. And I did think it was interesting because I know Mark Passio gets into thelema, and in thelema, the quote of "do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." I've heard Mark talk about how that gets twisted from what he actually meant. That Aleister Crowley actually meant thou do what thou wilt is God's will, right? Like ultimately,
Uppercase
like
W.
you can do whatever you want, and but ultimately the creator's will be done, right? And that's an interesting concept, and that if we really delved into that, that would get into a lot of deeper ideas about the nature of the universe and the world, and perhaps the multiverse. Like, is there multiple examples of creation where we do have the free will to destroy it if we want, or ultimately does the one true will always win over? And again, I'm just throwing that out there. We're not really going to answer that question, but what are your thoughts on that, Will?
Yeah, no, I think free will is essential. I think it's a must. Um, you can't have a reality where evolution can take place without free will. So evolution, freedom, God's will, these are all one and the same. The cosmic intention, the divine intention, or God's will, is to evolve, right? And that you can equate that to freedom. You could see this even in nature with plants, animals, and consciousness, right? We're here to evolve. Now you have to have free will to make the choice, because if you don't, then I mean it's not what it is. I mean, we can do this simply like we are making the decision to have this conversation now, aligning your will to the divine intention or God's will is the goal. This is what we're here to learn to do, right? That's the level that we're trying to get to. And then from there, we can do freedom is created once we get there, and evolution. So I think that's important. I like the video game analogy. I kind of see natural law in, if it was, let's just say, a video game. I'm not, no means am I saying that this reality is a simulation. Who knows? Um, but if it's a video game, natural law would make the character. Um, you can't just go through walls if it's not programmed in the video game, right? These are the parameters, right?
Right.
It's like, or if they have a cliff, let's say you're playing an RPG, and you can't just float over the cliff, right? The parameters of the game are built in there. So obviously, if you're going to beat the game, you have to stay within the parameters.
Yeah. Another thing I was thinking about that concept is that we are really at a point, and I'm sure we've been there in other times in history, but we're at a point right now where we're testing this theory, right? Like there is a faction of humans on this planet that are opposing God's will, and they have been for some time, and they are seeing how far they can go with it. And I think what you see happening is the reaction to that. So it is interesting where it almost feels like perhaps that has to happen for us to evolve, right? Like there has to be this effort to like test God's will in order for the rest of us to see the reality of the dangers of that, and the where that leads us, and then make the appropriate changes to align our behavior to the one true will. So
Mm.
but I do think that we are, we're seeing like how far can these guys take it. Can they I've heard people talk about a breakaway society, and that that's what these technocrats are trying to create. You could think of it as the Matrix, right? Like perhaps they are saying, we're rejecting God. We're gonna be gods. We're gonna create our own system, and people are gonna join us. And perhaps with free will, it looks like that is going to be allowed to happen, that a lot of these people will choose to go along with this plan, and get the Neuralink, and plug into the matrix and become somewhat of a battery to power the AI. And the rest of us, I guess, will do our best to create an alternative reality. And again, I think part of that does require us turning back to the creator and aligning our behavior with the creator.
Yeah. And how we do that is we use free will to do that. You know, the war that we're in right now, um, it's actually a war against free will. That's what it is. I mean, like the analogy with the Matrix movie, right? What happened to those people that are in the pods, right? Their free will has been completely taken away. Um, so and then they're given the illusion of free will by putting them in the Matrix. So everything that's going on currently in modern times, it's an attack against free will to take free will away. That's why we must use the greatest gift of free will, which is ultimately our strongest weapon, choice, to say no, to fight back. And that's what the predator class and the dark occultists and the powers that shouldn't be, that's ultimately what they want to do. They want to destroy free will, because that's the ultimate blasphemy for the creator.
Yes.
My opinion.
So I am working through the Servant King presentations again. This is the second time I'm getting through it. It's funny, when we first discovered it, I got through the 2 series and then he pulled the videos. So a lot of people didn't get to finish in our group the whole presentation, but luckily we pulled them. Will pulled them down. We are going to put them up on Odyssey. All rights reserved to Marcus. It's great work, but it needs to be out there. It needs to be in the world, and people do need to look at this. But I took this quote from the video I was watching today. He says, "Governments are not established to secure your God-given rights. That is a lie. Only the law and your promise to perform your duties can secure your God-given rights. Governments are formed to lose your God-given rights, to lose your birthright, inheritance, and property." So, he talks about that. That's why we own nothing, is because when we're born with the highest status of our birthright. It supplies us with the highest status, and I believe that is as a servant king, right? So it means like you've got all this creation that is at your dominion, right? And what are you going to do with it? And we give that away. We don't knowingly do it. Our parents sign us up into the system, but we're to blame too. We participate in it, and unfortunately most of us have probably registered our children with the state as well. If I had known this information a few years earlier, I probably wouldn't have, but yeah, I mean, it's an interesting perspective. So moving on to another thing, when I was listening to the Servant King, that just blew my mind, is he explains that the word the, THE, actually means God. So in dictionary.com, the, stressed the, unstressed before a consonant, the, unstressed before a vowel, the. It is the definite article used especially before a noun with a specifying or particularizing effect, as opposed to the indefinite or generalizing force of the indefinite article a or an. The book you gave me. Come into the house. So it's the definite thing, right? It's this is the microphone, right? But technically this is a microphone, right? Like, I guess if if you were going to say the definite article in reality, it would perhaps be not a physical thing, right? Like if you imagine that those archetypes exist in in the collective consciousness before they become a material thing. But going further to break it down, it says it is the variant is a variant of Theo, Theo, and they actually have the term here, Thearchy. Theo, a combining form meaning God, used in the formation of compound words like thearchy or theocrat or theology. So I thought that was interesting on a couple of levels. One is the fact that it's the definite article. I mean, in a weird way, it's kind of like we're saying, we're sort of like identifying God in all of every time we use the word the, right? But like, no one knows that, but you're like, that's, the tree, that's God's tree, that's, the man, that's God's man, the woman, that's God's woman, I just thought that was fascinating. And once I heard that, I had the thought that if the goal is to return to God, aka align our behavior with natural law, so Marcus and Mark are saying the same thing. The goal is to turn back to that creator. Should we stop saying anarchy, which means no rulers, and instead should we be saying thearchy? Real quick, I'll just do the definition of anarchy. Now, this is from the dictionary, and watch how wrong they are. A state of society without government or law. That is not what anarchy means. Anarchy does mean no government, in meaning no rulers, but it doesn't mean no law. Political and social disorder due to the absence of governmental control. The death of the king was followed by a year of anarchy. Lack of obedience to an authority, insubordination, the anarchy of his rebellious teenage years. Confusion and disorder. Intellectual and moral anarchy followed his loss of faith. It was impossible to find the book I was looking for in the anarchy of his bookshelves. General lawlessness and disorder, especially when thought to result from an absence or failure of government. The absence or lack of government, that's a correct definition. The absence of any guiding or uniting principle, that's false. That's not what the word means. So why don't you touch on that real quick, Will?
Yeah, that's another word again. Just grabbing a dictionary and looking something up, knowing that it's probably the publishing companies have already been bought out. In the early 1900s. Probably earlier than that. So and then again, so you need to go deeper, grab a Latin dictionary or Greek dictionary and translate the word, bring it back down to the root. And then you have an without, archon, ruler. So without ruler or rulers, that's what anarchy means. In its root form, that's literally what the word means.
Right. And when Mark teaches this, and this is great because, like I said, me and Will have been going back and forth on this. And then, ironically, or maybe not ironically, Mark's most recent presentations, he really drilled into this, the definition of anarchy and the fact that because anarchy means no rulers, it actually means the state of freedom. But he makes the distinction, he always makes the distinction that to achieve that state of anarchy, you have to follow natural law. And, he will go as far as saying, if you're atheist, it doesn't work. He very clearly makes that distinction. My concern was, once I thought about this fact, is that since Mark is saying that you have to return to God, you have to align, even though he's not calling it God, it is the same thing, it is the same concept. You have to align yourself with God's laws, nature's laws. That perhaps by going around saying anarchy, we're kind of insulting the creator, right? We're saying there's no rulers, when in reality there is a ruler, and that would be the creator. So in looking up the word archon, it says, like Will just said, it's without a ruler. And then it says archine, right? Arkhein. And that means to rule. Okay, so it does not mean law. Archon does not mean law. And I actually looked further into this, that what is the word rule in Greek? The word rule, like in a rule, like a standard, which when you look up that's actually closer to law. They actually use the comparison of like a ruler, right? Like a standard that you use is like, that's the rule that you use. The word in Greek is canon. So it's not, the word archon is specific to, in Greece, the definition is a higher magistrate in ancient Athens, and then also any ruler. In ancient Athens, one of the 9 chief magistrates. A magistrate is like a judge, right? So again, we have to come back to the fact that Mark Passio is using this word correctly. I have gotten into the human frequencies work, and they get into this topic a little bit, and I really appreciate their work, but in this case they are using the wrong definition for anarchy. They are using the definition that it means that I have no rules and I rule myself. But that is not what the word actually means. The word actually means no rulers. And I went a step further to ask, who were the original archons? And it seems as though they were potentially some type of other entity, other being, perhaps the Anunnaki, perhaps a spiritual entity that wasn't, the actual creator. But we would say it's a lowercase g God, right? Like some higher being that can mess with us because we're susceptible. We don't see them. We don't, we're not aware of them. They have different abilities that we don't understand, that we would consider supernatural based on, where we're at. And so I asked the question, is the source of creation an archon? And I would say it's not. That's my opinion on that, is that archon is a specific type of God. It's a God that intervenes in another being's reality. It could be a God that we've created. It could be a magistrate, like they said. It's an earthly God. It's not the creator. It's not the source of creation. So what are your thoughts on that, Will?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And just briefly, I don't want to get off subject too much, but the diving into the intervention theory and the archons, there's a good amount of evidence. Mark Passio does a presentation. Lloyd Pye has phenomenal work that supports this. It actually destroys Darwin's evolutionary theory. So, which the point I want to bring up with that is that society, how we have it now and through the known past, the systems have been given to us by who? By the archons, or the lowercase g, which means more advanced species or entities than what naturally was here on the planet. So, if we were to go to another planet and, there was a lower species, yeah, we would be very godlike to them, right? So they're the ones that gave us economics, government, all of this religion. They implemented this here on this planet because why not? They want to play God, and that's what they did, and we have carried this on all through our history till now. And this is why it's so important to return to nature, return to God, to natural law, because we have created a false system, and or we're making it go on. We're progressing it. So the
Right.
false constitution, right?
Right. Yeah, that's another good point that the Servant King makes, is that the original Constitution is creation, and everything else is a false constitution. It's, so the original creation, the Creator spoke into existence, and then we as man, we try to use the word to create a new constitution, and we put it on paper, right? And it's not the same, and in going through this thought process and working through this outline, the one thing that I came to is that there actually is a distinction between a rule and a law, capital L, law, right? The Creator doesn't make rules. The Creator lays down law, right?
Yep.
Rulers, archons, create rules, and those rules are, we get together and we think about what we want the rules to be. I mean, in a democracy, it's mob rule really. And another great point that the Servant King makes is that is the beast, is all of us putting our heads together, creating a new God, right? And so that's why he makes the distinction that the actual reality is from the Creator come many, right? And what do? From many, we create one. We create one system, one new God. And I believe that's what's on our money, isn't it?
Yep.
E pluribus unum, out of many one. That's the
Exactly.
opposite of what reality is. Reality is out of one comes many, comes all of us. We all have that birthright. We all are children of God, of the Creator. We all are born with that birthright, and we all reject it, not necessarily willingly, but until we break the cycle and understand it, and then stop doing that to our children, it's not going to change.
This is what waking up is all about, right? Awaken, you're illuminated, you're seeing the light, you're seeing what objective reality is. All right. And all you have to do is look to nature. If you need a model to aspire to, look at what the Creator has created and nature, in nature. Okay, we can't change this. This is there. It's absolute, and aligning our behavior to it, our actions. That's where it's at. That's why we need to return to nature, God. I use nature and God interchangeably. They're the same thing, in my opinion.
Exactly. So ultimately, as we wrap this up here, we would come to the conclusion that even though I was questioning and really, like sort of challenging what Mark was saying, what Mark Passio is saying with what this other perspective is, ultimately, I have to say that Mark Passio's rhetoric is correct. in the way he uses the terms and the distinctions he makes, and that ultimately, if the servant king was open-minded, and if the human frequency was open-minded enough and they listened to Mark Passio, they would see that they are actually saying ultimately the same things. To achieve true anarchy, freedom from, archons, other rulers, or earthly rulers, any authority other than creation. To achieve that, you have to align yourself with God, aka natural law. True anarchy means no rulers other than God. And again, we would argue that the true God, the source of creation, is not a ruler, right? It's a different, there's a distinction in that word right there, that the source of creation is not ruling over us like a ruler. It's a very different process. He's given us, I shouldn't say it's given us free will, and it's also given us the deterministic part of reality, which again Mark Passio gets into really well. And I did want to say one more thing, and then I'll let Will make his last comments, and then we'll wrap this up. And that is where we definitely differ with the servant king and with the human frequency, although I would have to talk to them. We've had Sharon on the show talking about orgone energy and orgonite, and we'd like to have her on again and talk about the assumed name certificate. But at the end of the servant king presentations, spoiler alert, his solution is to read the Bible. And he says it's the book of the law. Now, I had an issue with that because he went from saying that the original Constitution is creation, and then he talks about how we create these false constitutions. I don't understand how the Bible wouldn't also be considered a false constitution. And when they say it is the book of the law, the only way that makes sense to me is that if it's the book of man's law, and so therefore reading it can help you to navigate the beast, Babylon, the system, because it's showing you like that's where they laid down their law. That makes sense to me, because the Constitution, you could say, was somewhat took some of biblical ideas to create it, but to me I thought that was a contradiction, to say that the Constitution is a false constitution from the original Constitution, which is creation, but then the solution is to read the Bible, because I think it's clear that like there is no book that the Creator wrote and gave to us. If anything, it's in the Akashic records, and it's not, I don't believe it's written on a piece of paper. So anyway, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, man, well said. The true constitution that the Creator has left us is actually within our own psyche, our own consciousness, for the higher modes of thinking. Right, we're spiritual beings, which allows us to look at nature. Which nature, the laws of nature, that is the Constitution, and we're able to observe and use logic and reason, right? The logi, and decipher and align. And this is how we can learn and evolve in this schoolyard. And so, one thing I wanted to touch on too, I think with Anarchy and Thearchy, you talked about which is extremely fascinating, because then you have theology, which is God talk, and then Thearchy, which is God work, or the great work. This is a high level of spiritual action, this is what the great work is. The great work is to first and foremost align your own behavior to the laws of nature, to natural law, God's will, universal law, the divine intention, and then output that in your action. That's what Thearchy is. So I found that fascinating. But yeah, man, it's great talks. I love how we're diving deep. It's all about, John and I kind of have the motto of simplify the profound. So, we've been marinating on this topic for a long time, and then it's good to get on here and then try to, give it to people for a palatable session and see how they can digest on it. And then, we're looking for comments. So
yeah, exactly. I was going to say the same thing. I'm looking forward to anyone who watches this, potentially if they have any ideas they want to add to it. I think it's an interesting thing to think about. And it's something that comes up when you're out there trying to teach people about natural law, because it does imply a creator, and it doesn't really work without a creator. And it's something to consider for sure.
It's a must. With anarchy, freedom, you have to have that the creator involved. Obviously, that you can't be an atheist and an anarchist. Anarchy and thearchy, I believe it's actually both. Just one is at a higher spiritual level,
right?
And understanding. That's my opinion. That's how I'll leave it.
All right. Well, we want to thank everybody for all their support, people who have gone to the shop and picked up t-shirts, or people who have donated, and also just your kind words. We really appreciate it. We are glad that people are enjoying what we're doing, and we are enjoying it. So we're looking forward to bringing you more content in the near future. So Will, it's good to get back in here.
Yeah, man, it feels good.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's get at it.
Yeah. And always remember, put something good in the air and plant something good in the earth. Peace.
We be the natural freedom league, cause we become no longer unbegun. We seek in the wisdom, and that's why we did come to this prison, a prism. And that's why the beat thumps, and that's why we speak up. We be the natural freedom league, cause we become no longer unbegun. We seek